In this video, we'll learn how to use clipping masks in Krita using various techniques plus some advanced tricks and tips. This means we'll learn how to clip one layer to another layer's opacity such that the top layer isn't painted in areas where the bottom layer is transparent. We'll start by creating a new document in Krita. If you want to follow along, make sure that the new document has a white background created as a raster layer so we can easily display and hide it. As you can see in the layers docker, we have two layers. A fully transparent layer that we can start drawing on, and a locked background layer that is fully white. Let's draw something in the transparent layer. Here we've added some paint to the top layer, and Krita automatically blends this opaque paint against the white background layer. This is important because it means every layer is somehow storing the information about which pixels are opaque and which pixels are transparent. This is also called the alpha channel of the layer. If we hide the background, we'll see that Krita displays a checkerboard pattern instead of the white background. What this checkerboard pattern means is that the final color after blending all layers in the layers docker is transparent. In other words, this checkerboard represents transparency. It means there is nothing in the background. If we zoom in, we can see that the paint fades from fully opaque to fully transparent. This information is stored as an alpha value in the pixel. We can also say that the fully opaque pixels have 100% alpha, while the transparent pixels have 0% alpha. Because this image has an 8-bit color depth, 0% means the value 0, while 100% means the value 255. Let's add a new layer and paint on it with a different color. Now you can see that Krita is blending the green of the top layer with the red of the bottom layer according to the alpha of the top layer. Here on the layers docker, we have a tiny A letter icon next to every layer. This A letter is actually the Greek letter alpha. If we click on it, it toggles the inherit alpha setting on the layer. You can see that this makes the top layer clip to the bottom layer. The term inherit alpha is a bit misleading. You can see here that the top layer is still being blended with the bottom layer according to the alpha values of the pixels. Otherwise, we wouldn't have semi-transparent pixels making this gradient from green to red. Essentially, when blending layers, we have two separate processes. The first process calculates the resulting color after blending the top layer with the layers below, while the second process calculates the resulting alpha. When inherit alpha is enabled, the first process is still performed, but the second process is replaced by simply reusing the alpha value of the bottom layers. Consequently, pixels that are opaque can change color, but pixels that are transparent don't become opaque. Semi-transparent pixels also retain the same degree of opacity as they had before applying the top layer. The inherit alpha setting can be a bit confusing at first because of how the layer stack is processed in Krita. If we make the background layer visible, we'll see that the layer that was clipped before is no longer clipped to the layer under it. That's because inherit alpha doesn't clip the layer to only the first layer under it, but to the composited alpha value of all layers under it. Since the background layer is completely white, that means the whole canvas is opaque, so the top layer's clipping mask is now the entire canvas. This can be a bit surprising for illustrators because the way it works on various other digital art software, such as PaintTool SAI, Clip Studio Paint, Fire Alpaca, and even Photoshop, is that a clipping mask only clips to the first layer. How can we make inherit alpha clip only to the first layer then? To do this, we need to place the layers inside a group. Select both layers, right-click on them, and go to Group, Quick Group. Now the top layer is inheriting the alpha of only the layer below it. Essentially, when we have a group like this, Krita is creating a temporary image for the group, and after the layers inside the group are combined together, Krita blends the resulting image with the rest of the layers in the layer stack. However, there is one detail. This only happens if the group is not in pass-through mode. Here on the layer stack, the rightmost icon of a group looks like a brick wall. If we click on it, it toggles the pass-through mode. A layer group in pass-through mode exists only for organizational purposes, so it doesn't affect blending and alpha at all. To put it another way, when the group is not in pass-through mode, it's like the bottom of the group is a fully transparent image. It starts from scratch. That's why inherit alpha works the way we want. If we enable pass-through mode, then that doesn't happen, and Krita renders it as if there is no group at all, because a group starts with a transparent image. If we hide the bottom layer, the top layer with inherit alpha will disappear as well, since there are no opaque pixels in the canvas as far as the group is concerned. Similarly, if we drag and drop the layer with inherit alpha and place it at the bottom of the group, it will become invisible since its clipping mask becomes the bottom of the group, which is a fully transparent image. Let's add a third layer and paint it with a blue color. Observe that this layer doesn't affect the green layer with inherit alpha at all. That's because inherit alpha inherits the alpha from under the layer. It doesn't do anything with the blue layer that is currently above the green layer. If we make this new layer inherit the alpha as well, then we'll see it becomes clipped to the red layer just like the green layer. We can have as many layers clipped this way as we want. Since a layer with inherit alpha doesn't modify the alpha, a second layer with inherit alpha on top of it is inheriting exactly the same alpha values as the first one. Now let's see what happens if we place this layer at the bottom of the layer stack inside the group. Observe that this changes the clipping mask of the green layer. It's now clipped to the composite alpha of both the blue and the red layer. Let's move this blue layer to outside the group and then put both this layer and the group inside another group. We can do this by selecting both layer and layer group and using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl G. Now, if make this layer inherit the alpha, it inherits the alpha of the group under it. This isn't really necessary, as it does the same thing as it would do if the layers under it weren't grouped. Let's move this blue layer to the bottom and enable inherit alpha on the layer group. Now you can see that the whole group becomes clipped to the blue layer under it. Next, we're going to learn a few tricks we can do with inherit alpha in Krita before moving to other methods to clip layers. The first trick we're going to learn is vector layers. Vector layers in Krita let you use SVG scalable vector graphics inside of Krita. Let's start by using the polygon tool to draw a polygon inside the vector layer. What's great about vector layers is that we can easily edit the shape after we draw it using the Edit Shapes tool. I don't recommend trying to do vector art with Krita. Its support for vectors is really basic and honestly very clunky to use. For example, to set the fill color of this shape, I can click on the color selector while the shape is selected. But to remove the stroke outline, I need to go to Tool Options Docker, but not his Tool Options Docker. I need to switch to the Select Shapes tool first in order to edit the stroke of the shape. However, if all you need to do is create a simple vector clipping mask, then vector layers can be very convenient. Now that we have a shape in our vector layer, we can simply put it under the photo and toggle inherit alpha in the photo to mask it to our vector shape. Krita's tools only care about which layer is currently selected, not how the canvas looks, which means that we can simply select the vector layer and then the Edit Shapes tool, and we'll be able to easily edit our mask even if we can't actually see the blue shape that we drew. Krita comes with a few basic shapes that we can use, like square and circle, and there is even a way to make a squircle. But what if we want a shape that Krita doesn't have, like a star, a pentagon, or a hexagon? In this case, we can draw the shape in Inkscape, then we copy it, and we paste it in Krita. This works because both Inkscape and Krita use the same format for vector graphics, the SVG format. One last thing that we can do with vector layers in Krita is to clip a photo to a text. In Krita, the text tool creates text in SVG format, so a text layer is actually just a vector layer. The next trick that we'll learn is often used in digital illustration. We'll learn an easy technique to add shading to a flat color layers. First, I'm going to draw a simple circle here that will be our flat color layer. Let's pretend that this is a round rock or something like that. Then I'm going to add a new layer and use the gray color to paint the area that is going to be the shaded side of this sphere. Then I'm going to add another layer and use the same color to paint the area that is going to be the highlight of this sphere. Now I'm going to clip these two layers to the flat color layer, and then I'm going to change the blend mode of the shading from normal to multiply, which is found in the arithmetic category. The multiply blend mode literally multiplies the RGB values of one layer with the other. Since gray is 50% red, 50% green, and 50% blue, what this is doing is effectively having the values of the bottom layer. Because the black color is 0% RGB, the color with halved RGB values becomes darker. On the other layer, I'm going to set the blend mode to addition. What this blend mode does is simply add the values of the top layer to the bottom layer. This makes the color brighter because the white color is at 100% RGB. What's useful about this technique is that you can use the same two layers to apply lighting and shading to any color you have in an illustration. You don't need to use gray, by the way. You can try using colder colors for shading and warmer colors for the lighting. This doesn't really give you the best results, since it's impossible to tell what the color will actually look like, but it is a quick and consistent way to add shading to a drawing. A similar method to do this exists that uses only one layer. This time, we're going to use colors from black to white to draw on the layer, such that white is the lighting, gray is neutral, and black is the shading. Then we clip it. Now the blend mode that we'll use is in the lighten category, and it's called hard light. Observe that it seems to simply ignore the gray color while making white white and black black. We can then change the opacity of this layer to control how much it affects the color until we have a color that we like. Hard light isn't the only blend mode that works like this. Another option is to use the overlay blend mode. It's worth noting that by default, Krita creates documents with 8-bit color depth in a gamma-corrected color space. This also known as a perceptual color space. But for best results, you'll want to use arithmetic blend modes in a linear color space. If you use a linear color space, it will need to be converted to perceptual when exporting the image, which means you'll lose some color data. To compensate for this, you should use a 16-bit color depth. But if you do this, Krita will use more memory and the Krita file will be larger. Another clipping mask trick that we can use in illustration is using inherit alpha to change the color of line art. We can use this technique to make the lineart a gradient color, for example. The advantage of this technique is that we don't need to modify a finished line art layer to create colored line art. We can simply add the color as a separate layer and then clip it to the line art layer. Krita can also be used to design graphics for various purposes, such as creating banners for print or assets for game development. In these cases, one common technique to make a design look better is to add a texture to a shape. We can do this in Krita using a fill layer, which fills the entire canvas with a repeating pattern. Combined with layer styles, this can be a quick way to create all sorts of simple graphics. Next, we're going to learn about other methods we can use to create clipping masks in Krita. The first alternative method we're going to learn about is a blend mode called destination in. Let's say, for example, that we have a transparent graphic like this, and that we want to clip this graphic to a shape such as a circle. This is a problem that can come up when designing transparent graphics for websites, graphical user interfaces, and in video game development. If we use the inherit alpha method, we're going to have a problem. As you can see here, Krita is clipping the graphic like we want, but it's also drawing the layer that we're using as a clipping mask behind our transparent graphic, which is not what we want. What we want is a non-destructive way to clip the transparent graphic such that the background remains transparent. To do this, first we must place the clipping mask on top of the layers that we want to clip. That's because we're going to use a blend mode, and blend modes can only affect layers underneath a layer, not layers above it. Now we change the blend mode from normal to destination in, which is in the mix category. As you can see here, Krita is now clipping the transparent graphic to the circle shape, but it's not drawing the circle anymore. In other words, the color of this layer is completely ignored. Krita is only using its alpha values as a clipping mask. More technically, the effect of the destination in blend mode is that the final alpha value equals the alpha of the top layer multiplied by the alpha of the bottom layers. This means if we change the opacity of our clipping mask to 50%, everything that was 100% opaque before is going to become only 50% opaque, because 100% multiplied by 50% is 50%. Sometimes you may have a graphic of an icon or symbol that is a simple grayscale image without any transparency data. This is supposed to be used as a stencil mask. Sometimes black is supposed to be transparent, other times white is supposed to be transparent. How can we use a grayscale image like this as a clipping mask? Unfortunately, there is no blend mode that turns lightness into alpha. However, it's still possible to achieve the effect we want using a filter. With the stencil layer selected, let's add a filter mask to the layer stack. The filter that we want is called cross-channel color adjustment. That sounds really complicated, but what it does is very simple. After adding it, I'll right-click on the filter mask in the layer's docker and click on Properties to edit it. What this filter does is modify one channel of the layer using data from another channel, called the driver channel. In our case, we want to modify the alpha channel, so we select that, and we want to modify the alpha based on the lightness, so lightness will be our driver channel. Now, let's drag this left control point all the way to the bottom. We can see here in the canvas that black has become transparent. That's because we told the cross-channel color adjustment filter that 0 lightness means minus 100% alpha. That's how we make black transparent in Krita. Let's reset this to 0. Next, we'll make white transparent. To do this, we just need to drag the right control point all the way to the bottom. Now that we've turned grayscale in alpha scale, we can use it as a clipping mask by changing its blend mode to destination in. It's worth noting that there are other filters you can use to modify the alpha channel of a layer, such as the levels filter and the color adjustment curves filter. The next clipping mask technique that we'll learn is useful when working with transparent graphics or complex projects with many layers. Here you can see that I have two layers. In one layer I have a transparent stickman, and in the other layer I have his hat. Because his hat is transparent, I can see the top part of his head through the hat, which is not what I want. I want the area of the hat to become transparent in the image when the stickman is wearing it. How can I do this in Krita? First, we'll add a new paint layer that goes above the stickman, but under the hat, we'll paint on this layer over the pixels that we want to turn transparent. I'm using the red color here so it's easy to see, but it doesn't matter which color. The only important thing is that the pixels of this layer become opaque. Now we'll change its blend mode from normal to erase, which is in the mix category. This turned the layer into an eraser. As you can see, the pixels from the stickman layer under it are transparent now because they have been erased. Technically, this blend mode is the inverse of the destination in blend mode. While destination in multiplies the top alpha by the bottom alpha, the erase blend mode uses the complement of the top alpha instead. This means that when the top alpha is 100%, the bottom alpha is multiplied by 0%, and that's why the pixels become transparent. This blend mode is cool, but it's a bit inconvenient to have to hide and display two layers in order to toggle the hat. Let's put these two layers into a group. You can see here that our eraser layer has apparently stopped working. It's not erasing anything anymore. That's because we put it inside of a group. When a group is not in pass-through mode, the bottom of the group works like a fully transparent image, and if the bottom is already transparent, there is nothing for the eraser to erase. We can fix this by toggling the pass-through mode. Now the eraser can pass through the bottom of the group, and the group exists only for organizational purposes without affecting how our layer stack is rendered. One convenient detail about this is that we can still hide and display the group, and doing this will both erase the stickman layer and draw the hat over it. The next clipping mask technique that we'll learn works just like inherit alpha, but it's a blend mode. You can see here that I have a small comic page or comic strip with 3 panels. I want to add a rounded rectangle to the background of each panel and use it as a clipping mask, but there is a problem. I have way too many layers in each panel. This is going to make the layer structure of my Krita document a bit of a mess. Let me show you why. If I drag this clipping mask all the way to the bottom, I'll have to make every single layer above it inherit its alpha in order to clip the entire panel. Alternatively, I can put everything inside a group and then make the group inherit the alpha, but this makes the layer hierarchy one level deeper. Fortunately, there is another way to achieve this same effect. First, we grab our clipping mask and move it all the way to the top. Then we change the blend mode from normal to destination atop. The destination atop blend mode is just like the destination in blend mode, except it draws the layer behind the other layers. This means it works just like inherit alpha, except the clipping mask goes on the top of the stack instead of at the bottom. One useful detail about this blend mode is that if you have multiple groups like this, having the clipping mask at the top makes it easier to edit them one after the other, since you don't have to scroll all the way to the bottom every time you expand a group. The last blend mode that we'll learn about isn't really a clipping mask blend mode, but it also has to do with alpha, so I think it's relevant. You can see here that I have a cloud and a sun. What I want to do is add a second cloud to this graphic, but this second cloud should go behind the sun. There are various ways to do this, but the way we're going to do it is with a blend mode. We'll change the blend mode of the cloud's clone from normal to behind, which is in the mix category. This blend mode works just like the normal blend mode, except that it treats the top layer as if it were the bottom layer. More specifically, instead of drawing the top layer on top of the composite image, it draws the composite image on top of the top layer. In practice, what this means is that the layer is only drawn in pixels that are transparent. If a pixel is already opaque, the layer isn't drawn. This is kind of the opposite of how inherit alpha works. With inherit alpha, the layer is masked to opaque pixels under it, while with the behind blend mode, the layer is masked to the transparent pixels under it. As you can see here, we have a background layer in our layer stack which fills the entire canvas, so our second cloud layer is being drawn underneath this background layer. That's why we can't see the cloud at all. To fix this, we need to place the cloud and the sun into a group. Now we can see the cloud. This works because the bottom of the group is transparent, and since our layer is only drawn if a pixel is transparent, it gets drawn on these pixels that the sun doesn't cover. One cool thing about this blend mode is that we can place both clouds inside a group, set the group to pass-through mode, and then we can display and hide both the cloud in front of the sun and the cloud behind the sun with one click. This is neat and can be useful in some cases, but keep in mind that usually you'll want to use the compositions docker for something like this instead. This is how you use clipping masks in Krita. Leave a comment on the video if you have questions. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Krita tutorials.